All right, guys, so we've practiced donuts and now we want to practice the coloring portion to really make them come to life. So I pre-did one for you so you could kind of see. I didn't do the swirl frosting and I couldn't quite decide what colors, so I left that part incomplete, but I did complete the rest of it. And hopefully you will see that these donuts do come to life with a little bit of color in your oil pastels. So just a few reminders about your oil pastels is number one, I might not have the same colors as you. My kit that I have at home is a bit larger than yours. So I do apologize if I don't have the exact same color, but you're gonna be able to work that out on your own with the colors that you have, I promise. The cool part about oil pastels is that they kind of can look like paint while still being considered a dry medium, okay? So oil pastels blend really well together. They layer really well together. But you do have to know how to use them. So the first thing I did was I went in my kit and I grabbed all my like neutral browns, my black, and I even like grabbed like what we think of as like skin color, and got the white out too, so that I would have all of my dough options. As far as the icing options, that's going to be completely up to you and whatever color scheme you're going for. I would just say stick to things that we see. Typically, we see strawberry frosting, we see vanilla frosting, we see chocolate frosting. If you want to do something a little bit different or make like a red velvet donut, you are more than welcome to do that. Just kind of keep in mind that I might not show you everything that you might want to do, and that is okay. All right, so I have a piece of scratch paper that I kind of ripped out of my sketchbook, and I have that next to me so that you can see my kind of my color chart and what I tested. And sometimes you might want to like take like your colors and you might want to test, all right, well, what does it look like when I overlap with this color versus this color? Right? So the cool part about oil pastels is you kind of work your way up to that thick medium. You almost never have an oil pastel project that just has one layer. It usually always has something mixed on top of it, whether it's a darker color to create that shading, that shadow, or that lighter color to create that highlight, and sometimes both. All right, so you always want to think of the oil pastels kind of, they start off looking like crayons and they eventually look like paint. So you never want to press super, super hard at first because that's going to make it really hard to mix or layer on top of. You always want to kind of have that crayon sort of texture first where you can sort of see through to the paper before you start to develop your shadows and your highlights. So again, draw light till you get it right. It's kind of the same rule applies for oil pastels as well. Okay, so we're going to start with our dough of our donuts, okay? So that brown, tan, however you want to kind of think of the dough color in your brain. And so we're going to go ahead and do that for this donut and this donut. We're going to treat these a little bit different as if they're a like sugary based donut, more of like your apple cider type donuts. So we're going to go ahead and grab the colors that I picked. I chose kind of like one of my darker browns and my like yellow ochre sort of color. So it's not yellow and it's not brown. It's sort of a color that you wouldn't ever use for anything except for maybe like a wheat field or like corn or something like that. So it's not a very pretty color. We don't necessarily use it when we think of the rainbow or anything like that, but yellow ochre can come in handy. But I also have my white available, the kind of that tan, the sort of beige color as well, okay? So what I'd like you to do is take one of your regular browns you decide in your kit, and I'm going to actually have you outline lightly and kind of sketchy like. You don't want to make it perfect. The kind of bottom edges of your donut, and then you're going to go ahead and do that kind of to where the frosting meets your donut as well. And again, I'm working on my sketchbook today. I am not working on my final project because we always want to test our coloring before we commit to it on something more finalized. Especially if it's been a while since you used oil pastels, you need to kind of get warmed back up. So again, super sort of sketchy. I am not, pressing super hard at all. I don't want a really harsh outline. Don't forget about the inner edge of your donut as well. All right. Okay, so when we have that done, then I'm going to go to like my main color that I'm going to use, which is one of those like yellow ochre sort of colors. And I'm going to just do a light layer, and I'm going sort of in a circular pattern as I color. And the circles just kind of helps kind of blend everything together. I'm still in that kind of crayon phase where I can still see the paper coming through. And you might be like, Mrs. Vance, these look a little too yellowy, too burnt, if you will. And that's okay. We're gonna make it better, I promise. So I'm gonna do that to both of my donuts where we're doing the dough portion. All right, so now here's when the layers come in and when things are gonna look a little bit more realistic. Okay, so I'm gonna grab, you could do this with a couple things. You could try your white, or I'm gonna try adding my beige, or you could do a little bit of both. And by beige, I mean this is pale brown, they call it, number 7. And I'm going to still use my circular pattern, but now I'm making sure I go over that darker brown too, because maybe I wasn't the first time as I filled in. And you'll notice that this lighter color is going to work a little bit like a blending stick, where it's going to start to make things a little creamier and fill in your cracks, but it's not necessarily going to change the color a whole lot. It kind of is going to mute it down a little bit. Okay, so then from here I need to look at what still needs to be developed. How do I need to make it look a little bit more like my finished donut over there? Okay, so now this is when you're going to want to like kind of go back and forth with your colors a little bit. And, you know, maybe I add a little dark to the outside edges because that's where the darkest area will be based on lighting. And maybe I even go in with my white in some areas to really kind of lighten it up a little bit. But I'm just going to switch back and forth till I feel like I've blended my colors, but still have a little bit of shading happening. And if you feel like it's too outliney, take that darker color and just add a little bit more in there and it'll soften it up a little bit. So I need to remember to do the same thing to the back side. But the back side actually inherently could be a little darker because the inners of your donut would end up getting shadowed a little bit more. And again, I could go back with my white if I felt like it was getting a little too yellow and soften that up again. But making sure I go over that dark brown so it starts to blend in a little bit more. Okay? So, the only thing that is different about this is I will say for the bite area, I didn't use the yellowy ochre color at all. I used the dark brown as an edge, but then I went back in with my tan and my white to make sure that the bite inside, the dough inside, was lighter than the exterior. Because when you think about baking or a cake or anything like that, you always have that crust, that edge, but when you bite into it, it's nice and, you know, a lot brighter. Okay? But we don't ever want to go straight white because it's just going to look a little too unrealistic as far as like your dough is concerned. All right, so that's how we're gonna deal with dough. I'm gonna go up here and talk about these sugary donuts really quick. Now, when you think of like an apple cider donut, they maybe are a little bit darker than your average dough of a donut, but they have all that sugar around it. So how are we gonna get that texture? And that's a little tricky, and this is gonna be the first time I do it too, so no big deal. I'm still gonna start by outlining everything to help create that eventual shadow. And I'm going to make sure that the top edge, because these are my stacked donuts, I need more brown on the top edge because of that inherent shadow that would come from that top donut. Okay, So once I get that in there, then I'm gonna switch to another color, and I've got to kind of decide what am I gonna do, how am I gonna mix this. I'm still gonna use that yellow ochre color, but I think I'm gonna not use the beige and the white yet. We'll see. This is still an experiment to try to create that sugariness of just a sugar donut. So this would be more of a cake-based donut, right, versus a fried pastry donut. Okay, so I know we still doesn't look like much of anything yet. You're like, Mrs. Vance, where are you going with this? All right, so I'm gonna come back with my brown. So oil pastels kind of work a little bit like colored pencils too, where if you press lightly, you're not going to get a lot of pigment or brightness out of the color. And then the more layers and the harder you press, that's how you get that saturation of color. Okay. All right, so I've got to figure out how I'm going to create that sugary texture. And I think it's going to do with like kind of how I blend everything together here. So I'm going to go across one more time and just do a little bit of blending with that like middle brown, yellow ochre color. Just a little bit. All right, and then I think I'm going to take the white and we'll see what happens. I'm going to make kind of lots of little small, like almost like we did with stippling. And so I'm making just like little circular movements, but making sure it's not like just everywhere. I don't want to color over the entire thing. I want that white to kind of create a rougher texture, and I do think it's kind of working. Because when you think of like a sugary donut, the color still shines through, and there's some areas that absorb that sugar more than others. So I've kind of just created a texture with the white to kind of show the sugar. It's pretty tricky to do, but I do think it's working okay. And I think the problem is actually this glaring bite that I didn't address yet. So I think the biggest thing would be to go in with that very light layer of beige, and then to go over it with my white. And then adding these sort of just little tiny like textures down here of the bite marks that I kind of added. Almost like little like streaks. And then just help blend that in. I think that goes a long way, and I think that donut really comes to life now. So when I go to do this top donut, I need to use the same colors, but I'm going to have less dark value, right? Because that donut, I still need the dark to outline first. And I need to make sure that I have a pretty clean edge where the two donuts meet, right? And then obviously I would have to deal with my spiral too, but not on your final project. You won't have to deal with that. But yeah, I'd probably want to keep this top donut definitely on the lighter side, so now that it really looks like that shadow is working in our favor to show the overlap and the depth of our donut as we go. All right, so I'm not going to repeat the whole step for this one. You saw me do it down here. You can always rewind if you need to. Let's talk about frosting a little bit and how do we create those highlights and shadows in the frosting to make it look even a little bit glossy. So it is tricky because if you have sprinkles, they're going to kind of get in your way a little bit. So you got to work around them. So it's okay if you just do some donuts that are plain frosting, no swirls or sprinkles, kind of like you have over here with the jelly donut. And so I know I have my directions on there, but like, let's think about, you know, if we want it to be jelly, it will look a little bit like blood coming out because most jelly-filled things are raspberry or strawberry jelly. So I'm going to go ahead and grab some of my red values just so I can have those down here. And then I'm going to go ahead and let's see. Well, usually, you know what? I don't know. I'm going back and forth because my favorite donut is that custard donut. So that's got a chocolate frosting. And typically it's filled with a cream, which is white. But I've already kind of showed you how to do that with the inners of the, with the regular donut. So I think I'm going to just kind of do it next to it. So for like a regular cream, you would use your white for sure and just kind of let it be, but then you would take like just a little thing to kind of add some like corners and highlights to show that it has a little bit of movement as it comes in here, nothing crazy. And I just grabbed whatever I thought would be most off-whitish without being too much of another color. And just kind of blend that out, and that would be my cream. But I'm going to go ahead and make this jelly because I think some of you would be intrigued by that. So what I am going to do is I'm going to grab my reds and I'm going to make sure that I've got something dark to mix with my reds. So this is sort of like a reddish brown, or you could use regular brown even too. Don't go all the way to black because that's going to be probably a little too harsh or dark. But I'm going to go ahead and outline. I'm working dark to light again, just like I did with the dough. I'm outlining where the jelly would come from, but not the edge of the frosting, okay? And just that edge, nothing crazy. And make it kind of loose there. And then I'm gonna come in with the red value that I think I wanna use for the majority of it. And so I'm overlapping what I just did and starting to fill in, but I'm leaving a few areas with white. And the reason why I'm doing that is to show like the shininess of jelly and how it can kind of glisten. So I'm gonna go ahead and kind of fill it in. I'm sort of avoiding that middle area because now I'm going to take my white, and I might need to clean my white off a little bit from the former colors that I was using. And now I'm going to take that white and definitely go over those white spots that I left, but now I'm mixing that middle with white, and so it's obviously going to turn a little pink. And now I can go back in, and now that I've kind of got my 3 different colors and layers, I can sort of blend. Back and add a little darkness where I need to, but basically you want to use that dark tone, that mid tone, and then that highlight to help create some like glisten effect to your jelly, and that looks kind of nice. So again, I didn't put that dark edge on the top. You want to think about it like pouring out, so that dark edge would only be kind of like at the edge of where it pours. Okay, so I could do whatever with my frosting. Let's say I'll do strawberry frosting because maybe I'll do chocolate for this one. So if I were to do strawberry frosting for this one, I grab my white, my light pink, and my dark pink. If your kit doesn't have a dark pink, you could use a red. It'll still work okay. But I'm going to take that darkest pink and work my edges just like we've been doing with everything else. Just kind of outlining and then making it a little looser and not perfect everywhere. If it's too perfect, it just won't look right. I'm going to go over my pencil here. And if you have a lot of extra stray pencil on your paper, you might want to reduce that before you start coloring, because obviously I'd want to get rid of those words. All right, so I've gotten my rough edge, clean up that side a little bit. All right, so now I'm going to go in and overlap a little bit with my regular pink. It is mixing with my pencil, so it's getting kind of yucky. And this is why you want to do what I just told you to do, which is reduce the amount of pencil that is on your paper as much as possible before you oil pastel. Pencil is a movable material, so it is going to mix with those oil pastels a little bit, and so my pink frosting is getting kind of muddy. All right, so then once I get that done, I'm gonna do a light layer of my pink all the way across, and it's mixing with my pencil. I'm sorry, this is yucky, but I think you get the idea. And then I'm gonna take my white in the middle and then blend it back out. So anything that was left, sort of that crayon texture, is getting blended back out. And then I can go back in with my middle pink again, and I'm just sort of filling in any gaps where it looks too white or anything like that. And that way it's got that sort of highlight, it looks a little glistening, it looks like it's rounding out. And then I'm gonna go and clean up some edges and corners that might have just gotten a little too loose because I'm working pretty quickly. But you're gonna work a lot slower and more careful because I'm gonna give you plenty of time to do this. All right, the last thing I want to talk about over here is that chocolate frosting that we talked about with our sprinkles. If you are worried about the sprinkles and getting contaminated with other colors, go ahead and do those first. That's fine. And I'm not worried about you shading those. The oil pastel alone is going to make it kind of tricky to color them in. So I'm using that edge. And everybody likes rainbow sprinkles, so I'm going to go ahead and rainbow it out. So you get the idea. It is tricky to do tiny details. So if for whatever reason you drew super teeny tiny details on your page, you may want to reconsider before moving to your final drawing. Definitely give it a shot, test it out, see if it works for you at all. But it just might be a little too challenging based on the edges of your oil pastels not working with you, etc. All right, so I've got my sprinkles finished. So now I'm going to go back and, you know, you're going to be like, Mrs. Vance, how am I going to shade chocolate? Well, we're going to use black, okay? So we need something darker than that dark brown. So I do want you to edge carefully your donut, just like we did before. And that looks like I need to peel my oil pastel soon. That's okay. When you peel oil pastels, you want to try your best just to peel the very edge and just kind of take off just the top layer to protect your fingers. Otherwise, you're going to get real gross on your fingers. But that's okay. It will come off. It does stain a little bit, but by stain, I mean it can stain your clothes, but it'll like leave a little bit of pigment on your hands, but I promise you it's not toxic or anything like that. Okay, so once I get my my black outline, then I'm going to grab my dark brown, and I am overlapping but then moving inward. And as I do that, I just have to make sure that I'm carefully moving around my sprinkles. If you go too fast, you're going to go through them and it's going to look a little sloppy. So anything with sprinkles or like the swirl frosting or anything like that is going to take you a little bit longer because you have to maneuver around the pieces. So I might not even finish the whole thing in the demo because I want you guys to get moving here. So I will just finish this back portion. All right, so I'm going to cover pretty much the rest of the donut. So because white would be like kind of too light, we're going to cover the whole thing before we add any white value to help shade. So I would come in just with the white and kind of go back and forth just around this inner ring here. Like, so think about like where the center of the frosting would be, and that's where you would add that white, and you can kind of see it over here with the strawberry frosting. So it's a little more subtle on the camera, I apologize. But again, if you need the edges to be darker, then you go back with the black, follow it up by overlapping with the brown a little bit to blend it, and blending those edges in. So same thing goes working around this side. You want that wherever you put the white to be in the center, but you want it to blend so that it makes a smooth transition. I don't want to necessarily see three colors. I want to see a smooth transition that almost looks like, you know, 10 or 12 different colors were used instead. So I hope that makes sense. I hope you enjoy kind of playing with the oil pastels, kind of feeling them out, getting used to them, comfortable again, and then starting to work on your practice donuts. And then we will feel ready to move on to our final donuts next day. Have a good one, guys.